welcome to this new webinar. We'll start in a minute, but just I open the room to let you enter. So this event is entitled Diving into EDU4Standards, Intended Learning Outcomes for Education on Standardization. As the name suggests, is a webinar focused on some of the results, the preliminary results of EDU4Standards, which is an EU-funded project started earlier this year in January. My name is Maria Giuffrida. I'm from Trust IT. I will be the moderator for this event. And before introducing the lineup of speakers that we have today, let me just tell you a few words about EDU4Standards. First of all, you can visit our website, edu4standards.eu, to learn more about what we're doing. But in short terms, this is a, let's say, ambitious initiative that aims to have an impact on how standardization is taught in Europe in higher education institutes. The main output that we will have at the end of our journey is the innovative teaching concept of standardization, which will be piloted, so via pilots in different domains. And we will have many activities to distribute, our materials and our pilots with teachers, with students, via specific events, including academic standard days, and we'll create also an association. We aim to engage a large community of people, of companies, of universities, and today we have almost 100 registrants in the event. We're very happy about it. And also our consortium is, very diverse in terms of participants. Today's meeting is focused on one of the preliminary outputs, as I was saying, that you see in this slide. So it's about the presentation of the framework for the intended learning outcomes for standardization professionals. We will have our partner, Graz University, presenting this. We have 4 speakers from Graz University, all women. I'm very happy to say this. So we have Barbara Reiter, that will start the presentation focusing on the values in standards education. Then we'll have a presentation on the framework by Ristina Veljanova. Then some words about the approach and educational framework, the competence and the attitude that has shaped the work by Heike Wendt. And finally, we will conclude with Elisabeth Staudegger with some examples and concrete applications of the framework. And if you see the titles and, the area of expertise of our panelists today, one thing that I want to highlight that's very interesting is that our speakers, they all come from different backgrounds. So we have Barbara, who's expert in ethics, like Christina. Heike is involved in educational sciences, and Elizabeth has a law background. But, it's very nice that being the values and the consideration of values, one of the key topics of this work, this diverse type of backgrounds was able to, work very well together with this first output. And also other partners in consortium, of course, contributed. So it's also the approach embeds some, values around being as much as possible diverse, let's say. So one last comment before starting. In terms of housekeeping, you will see we will have 4 presentations, 10 minutes presentation each, and they will come one after the other just because they're very connected and we don't want to, disturb the flow of the presentation. But we have a dedicated Q&A and interaction session at the end for 20 minutes where we will address all the questions that you will ask us. What I ask you is please to basically don't wait until the end to write your questions. It will help us moderate better if you write your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box whenever you want. Okay, feel free to use the Q&A box and the chat for your comments, your opinions, and your questions, and we will see what comes during the event, and we will select, the most pressing questions to address in the final session. We will conclude by 4:15. So I think that's all. One last remark is this event is being recorded, and the video and the slides will all be available in our website in the next few days. Just a final slide, if you want to, keep in touch with the project and our next activities, you can subscribe to our newsletter or download our flyer. My colleague Sabrina, who's helping in the back end, will put the links in the chat in a few moments. Thank you very much for joining us, and I now leave the floor to Barbara for the first presentation.
Thank you very much, Maria, and also Sabrina, for putting the seminar together. I have the honor and the pleasure to start today. As you already heard, I'm a philosopher. My background is in ethics. And as often when you start a project, you go to the very beginnings. So you ask, what is X? In our case, the X is values. And the process has been really exciting for the last 10 months. And we decided to split up what we are doing, formulating the intended learning outcomes in 3 different fields that you see on this slide. Our contribution consists of course, the EDU4Standards value-based ILOs framework for standardization education. This is what we had to formulate for the others to pick up from there and formulate the framework even further, come up with the teaching concept, and then for the individual plans for the pilots. You will hear about this later. We also found that we all use a lot of concepts, and it's always good to have a glossary where all the concepts and all the abbreviations and all the key terms are collected. And the glossary is like also a little bit like a bibliography, because you can use it in order to read further or to check which sources we were using for putting together our task. And then there is the support study, which is a lengthy, beautiful text, mainly written by Christina, and very highly recommended to read, because it gives all the backgrounds of the different thoughts we had while formulating the ILOs. And now on the next slide, it is empty, and then there is a person, there is a human being. It is defined by its borders, and it's a little blurry because, like, we all blend into our background and we all are very vulnerable. And the idea of values is, as they are formulated in the second article of the Maastricht Treaty, which is one of the main documents we are drawing our core values from, human dignity and the value of the human life and individual is one of the first key terms and key values we work with. And ever since the last 250 or 300 years, this, of course, ever since the French Revolution and even a little bit earlier from the Siècle des Lumières, the Age of the Enlightenment, this has been one of the major European ideas, that a human being has dignity in itself, and this dignity should be valued very highly by the political system and by the society. The next one is freedom. This was one of the big topics, of course. Get rid of the masters and oppressors, and give freedom to the individual person instead of to just some people in a society. Everybody has the right to freedom. And the next one is equality, of course. I mean, this is égalité, fraternité, liberté. This is all, of course, in the values that we still value today in Europe. And equality means not that we are all the same when it comes to our qualities, but that we have the same rights to be who we are. And that is also something that is embedded in democracy as the system that in different shades and forms maybe, but basically we all have in Europe, that actually we as a people, we as individuals, we have the right to choose the government that runs the whole place. And the last one is the rule of law. The rule of law means that we formulate our laws, and that we have the trust that the others and ourselves actually follow these laws. And in the rule of law, there is also the idea that we actually agree on most of the things that the laws speak about. For example, sustainability, but I will come to that in a moment. So these 5 are the core values we found. First, we had 14 values, and then everybody said, yeah, they are very important, but there are too many. So we actually thought there are core values, and we found them also, as I said, in the second paragraph, article number 2 of the Maastricht Treaty, which is binding for all European countries. And we decided to have like the core values, but then go further and add the values we also found, and that they are also very valuable. Think of the 17 goals that we also have. So we had to integrate them. So rule of law and equality also lead us to sustainability, because everybody has an equal interest in actually living in a sustainable world. And the next one is care. Human dignity can only exist when there are people who care for us. And we also have to think about self-care, and we have to make sure in a society that there's always a space for people to be taken care of. If even either they do it for themselves and their families, or if not, then the society will kick in. And the next one is autonomy. Autonomy to be able to move freely, to choose your goals in life, but also to move to where you feel you can move to. And it's also, of course, the precondition for democratic decision making. And the next one is responsibility. Of course, we can only have responsibility when we judge ourselves as autonomous being as well as the others, and only then it makes sense to speak of a democracy. And the next one is respect, which comes with care and human dignity, but also we have to respect the freedoms of others, the freedom of other people, which means we have to draw back on what our interests may be when it hurts the interests of others. And the next one is trust. Trust has a lot to do with the rule of law, but also with all the other ones. I mean, it's not so easy to put one value just to one other value, because they are like a network. They are sustaining each other, and they are all interconnected. And the next one, protection. Human dignity needs to be protected, and that is equal for everybody who has these rights and values in the European Union. And the next one, participation. Of course, democracy only works when we all equally participate and take our share of responsibility in the societies we live in. And so that was it. These are the core values. The core values. And you might say, wow, that sounds cool, like the human rights, but they are a little bit abstract. So we also need to add the question, who do we want to be? Who is this person in the middle with the blurry edges? We still have to fill that with individual content and life plans. So who do we want to be is the first question. The second question is, of course, which world do we want to live in? Is this already the political society and the society we want to live in, or do we want to participate in order to change it? And then the last question from my side on this slide is, these are very abstract ideas, and in order to understand how they can function and how they are brought to life, they need a lot of context. And here I hand over to Christina.
Thank you, Barbara. So now moving to the context. So the main goal for our University of Graz team as part of the project was to develop a value-based intended learning outcomes framework for standardization education. So basically, we had to find a way to merge three fields. So the field of standardization in the context of education, and we also had to find a way to integrate values. Next slide. So how we did it, the methodology for developing the value-based ILOs framework involved, as you can see, analysis of relevant studies and documents that are related to standardization, then literature review on values, and also talks with experts experienced in teaching standardization, as well as other forms of feedback. And all this led to several preliminary insights. So while there are similarities in the content or what is thought as part of standardization education, so the topics that are covered, there is diversity as to when that content is taught, that is at what level. And also the explicit inclusion of a wider range of values in standardization education. We mean here beyond this traditional, such as safety, security, interoperability, efficiency, and so on, is on a modest level. Next slide. So our framework is based on 4 pillars. The existing and relevant work on standardization, meaning handbooks, competence models, other content. Then 3 frameworks, the European Qualifications Framework for Lifelong Learning, then the ISCIT, and Bloom's Taxonomy. Also Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union, which Barbara mentioned, where the European values upon which the EU is based are stated. And also published materials from CDFOP, which is the European Center for the Development of Vocational Training. Next slide. The value-based ILOs framework for standardization education is designed for several stakeholders. So the main 2 groups of stakeholders that we wanted to address were lecturers of standardization, both experienced and new ones, and also learners as future standards professionals, and learners in a broader sense, which includes those that are interested to learn more about standardization, but do not necessarily become standards professionals. Also, other stakeholders that can directly or indirectly benefit from the ILOs framework are standardization bodies, industry, research organizations, NGOs, the public sector, citizens, and so on. Next slide. Right, so regarding the approach, the process of developing the value-based ILOs framework for standardization education consisted of several key steps, as you can see from the slide. So in the first step, the basis for the ILOs framework was determined. For this, 3 well-known frameworks were chosen. So the European Qualifications Framework for Lifelong Learning, the International Standard Classification of Education, and Bloom's Taxonomy. In the second step, based on these 3 frameworks, then the structure and the different levels of qualification of the ILOs framework were determined. And in the third step, for each of the levels of qualification, a set of ILOs were defined. Also, when defining the ILOs, relevant and existing work on standardization education was consulted, which was then complemented with a value-based approach, meaning that for the ILOs, for each of the levels that we defined, value considerations were explicitly included. And also existing materials from CDFOP were consulted, in particular on how to write and develop intended learning outcomes, such as the European handbook. Right, so now we briefly I will say something about each of the 3 steps. Next slide. Right, so these are the 3 frameworks that comprise the basis of the EDU4Standards value-based ILOs framework. So on the very left is the European Qualifications Framework. It consists of 8 levels of qualification. It is learning outcomes based, where learning outcomes are defined in terms of knowledge, skills, and responsibility and autonomy. Although developed for the labor market, the learning outcomes of the European Qualification Framework can also be matched with educational levels, which is something that we did as part of our work. In the middle is the ISCID framework. It distinguishes 9 levels of education. So the focus is on the different stages of the education system from early childhood to doctoral level. And as you can see, it is age-bound. And on the right is Bloom's taxonomy framework that contains 2 dimensions, cognitive processes and knowledge. And for example, the cognitive process dimension, which you can see on the slide, consists of 6 categories. So remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create, which rise in cognitive complexity. Next slide. So in the second step, we then determine the structure and the levels of our value-based ILOs framework. And I'll just briefly mention some of its main characteristics. So our framework is learning outcomes based, where learning outcomes are defined in terms of knowledge, skills, responsibility, and autonomy. It consists of 9 levels of qualification that are matched with 9 levels of the education system. We also included an approximate age range for each of the levels of education. And the idea is that by matching the levels of qualification coming from the European Qualification Framework with the levels of education coming from the ISCID framework, the EDU4Standards value-based ILOs framework shows after the completion of what stage of the education system, what qualification in standardization can be gained. Also, the ILOs we defined within each level follow the same pattern in rising of cognitive complexity as in Bloom's framework, meaning the first, as we proceed toward the levels, also the expectation in terms of knowledge arises. The framework starts with level 0, so early childhood education, and here we wanted to argue that learning about values starts at a very early age, and hence learning about values in standardization should also start at that age. So first comes as an implicit knowledge of values that is brought to us by parents, by our family or friends, which then transforms into explicit knowledge as part of more formal settings. And also this whole idea is in line with Kolbeck's theory on moral development. This is the process which people can make a distinction between what is morally right and morally wrong. And this theory suggests that a moral development occurs in a series of 6 stages throughout a person's life, with the first phase or stage starting at age 0. And also it is important to highlight that the EDU4Standards value-based ILOs framework is designed to also cover levels of qualification that are attained outside of the formal education system, hence the last column of the table, where age does not play a central role. And this also makes it possible to incorporate lifelong learning, including in-company training, and also practitioners of standardization who have no formal education. And in this way, the EDU4Standards ILOs framework can be implemented in the education system, but also anytime and regardless of age and education system in any course on standardization. Next slide. So in the next few slides, I would like to briefly show you how the framework that we developed looks like. So it is a 3-part framework. In the first part, we developed a general value-based ILOs framework for standardization. And here our goal was twofold. So to address the problem of fragmented standardization education by providing a framework which has a clear structure and provides guidance on ILOs and levels of qualification, and also to demonstrate how values in general can find their place in standardization education. So at this stage, we did not focus on any values explicitly, but just wanted to show how the process of integrating values in standardization education and formulating corresponding ILOs would look like or would work. In the second part, we showed how concrete values can be translated into ILOs. This is the second framework for each of the levels. And for this, we used as an example the 5 EU values stated in Article 2 on the Treaty of the European Union. And in the third part, or the third framework, we focused on green, digital, and gender skills in the context of standardization, and formulated for them ILOs and for each of the levels. Next slide. Right, so this is an excerpt of the first framework, so the general value-based framework for standardization education. As you can see, it consists of 4 columns. So the first column are the levels of qualification matched with the levels of education. As an example, here we have the ILOs defined for level 0 and also level 1. The second column is the knowledge column. So we included here what is expected the learner to know at this level. The third column are examples of skills for each of the levels. So what is the learner able to do based on the already attained knowledge? And the fourth column is the responsibility and autonomy column, that basically responsibility and autonomy that go with each level. Next slide. This here is an excerpt from the second framework, which focuses on the European values. As an example, here we have level 3 and level 4 of the framework. And again, here we follow the same structure, so knowledge, skills, responsibility, and autonomy. And in this framework, we defined examples of skills for each of the 5 EU values, as you can see. And next slide. And this is the last example, is an excerpt from the third framework, which focuses on green, digital, and gender skills. As an example, here we have level 8, which is doctoral level, and you can see the examples that we provided for the green, digital, and gender skills. So that will be all from my side. Now, Heike.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, we do have, as a result of 1 year of hard work, a framework to discuss, to propose how values can be integrated into standardization education. And I would like to say a few things about what comes next. And I do that in my role as a professor for empirical education research. So I thought it might be interesting or important to distinguish 2 things we need to do. The one is to validate the proposed framework, and this could be done by now designing educational programs or courses, but also to do further research in that regard. And in the next minutes, I would like to say a little bit more on that. And of course, another aspect would be questions on how can we further promote the ideas, and what would be next step to implement. So let me start talking a little bit about validation. One of the approaches to validating the proposed value-based framework for standardization education, of course, here could be implementing it to the task of designing learning situations. And as the framework is rather broad, we would need to make sure that this is done in different disciplines on different educational levels, but also to interdisciplinary learning situations, as here this might be also relevant in terms of content focus. What would that mean? Designing courses and programs, and also to engage into curriculum development, and to consider how this could be further aligned with already existing programs, with standards that are existing, with curricula that exist, and already with existing assessment tools which are existing in different sectors and which also differ in the different European context we are working with. Maybe if you could click it a little bit further. Designing here in that regard means that we have to engage into further discussions. Now the proposed framework is having, if you have been very attentive, you've been seeing that the proposed framework at the moment is very much focusing on proposing necessary knowledge and necessary skills. But if we talk about competences, then also here we have to keep in mind that also talking about competences also we need to talk about attitudes, especially when we consider thinking about now creating learning situations, creating programs and curricula. We do not just have to talk about goals of a program or specific learning objectives, but we also have to engage into a discussion in what actually should be the learning experiences, what should be the methods, and how should we approach teaching people about values in standardization education. And if participation, for example, autonomy and democracy are very important value for us, then possibly a very traditional lecture in which students are rather recipients and also engaging into a discussion or having no opportunities to apply these thoughts may not be possibly may not be supportive enough to develop the different dimensions of the competences we are envisioning here. So we have to talk about attitudes we wish from educators and also attitudes we wish to develop through the practice of teaching a little bit more in that regard. And also if we build our thoughts here on the ideas of constructive alignment, then it's not just enough to talk about goals and learning objectives and methods, but we also have to consider what would be appropriate assessments, tools, what could be indicators. And another question we further need to engage in is the question of recognitions. How important is this framework? How important is this framework for us? How important is this aspect in standardization education? How much credits do we want to give it? Is it an additional topic in a specific course? Does it need much more place? Where should it be placed in the curriculum? And how then can we certify and give credits for specific competences? So here, all of this, Maria, if you could click a little bit more, all of this needs us as a community to engage into further discussion in a participatory process, which should consider all these different design features. Next slide, please. Of course, then as an educational researcher, just proposing, deducting a framework and showing that it works and that it might be beneficial to structure and design educational learning situations may not be considered enough. There's further research work on the competence framework that needs to be done, not necessarily in the course of this project, but which would be a research agenda for general community if we are together successful in promoting an implementation. We may want to study further the relationships of constructs in this framework in relation to other competencies-based frameworks, how to align these value skills we have been looking into here with other frameworks which are very prominent, 21st century skills, with civic education competencies. Where do we see the alignment here? This might be theoretical work that further needs to be done. Also, the competency model underlying the framework here would need some empirical validation, developing specific assessment tools which actually may show us that the competency model actually holds also towards empirical testing. What we do need to do is more systematic, context-specific curriculum analysis for different educational levels to ensure that the generalized alignment here to the ISCED stages and how that may differ in different educational contexts, as also in Europe, civic education looks very much different in different countries, in different member states. Also, would be helpful maybe to have some more empirical data on what actually is a baseline we can consider of what do people know in terms of values. Barbara introduced, what can we expect that everyone maybe at the end of secondary school, what are basics understandings we could build on, and regardless of specific educational programs, what is something that could be taken for granted as a starting point. So this would be helpful to have some further ideas on that. Then for the different tasks, like the different examples we wish to develop, we need design-based research on what could be very rich delivery formats. and also studies what could be very effective approaches here to different teaching and learning, arrangements. And in general, we would need further research on how could we actually assess now these different competencies in an efficient way. So a big research agenda for all of us to engage with in the future on the basis of this framework that has been proposed. And then we have another task together, which maybe is on a more political level here. Maria, you could go to the next slide. And this is also then leading to Elisabeth giving us some more insight on what is planned as part of the projects. But questions are, how can we actually promote the value-based framework for standardization as a standard in education in the European education area? Maybe as a result of our discussion on how to further design educational learning situation, maybe there's a vision that we could also develop standards on standardization education and what actually could be a common standard on which could be developed out of developing best practice examples for different learning settings, which then could be rich examples for people to get inspired in what actually implementation or alignment with this framework could look like into the different educational institutions. One of the aims would be here to identify key players to reference and to implement these ideas into their curricula. And of course, the idea here to formulate this competence-based framework in alignment with the European qualification frameworks can serve now this framework could serve as a reference instruments to be used for further implementation into national qualifications frameworks. I think for this, one of the most important tasks now would be to inspire people a little bit more in developing examples on what actually could that look like as best practice in different educational situations. And I will hand over to Elisabeth here.
Thank you, Heike, for handing over to me. So now it's up to me to explain a little the next steps. Firstly, Barbara talked about the values we implemented. Christina explained how we did it in detail. And now Heike, as an educational researcher, goes steps forward how to implement intended learning outcomes into, firstly, a overall teaching concept, the innovative teaching concept on standardization. Well, this is the very first step we are going to do until the end of the year. Here, our partners within Work Package 2, which is University of Belgrade and also University of Vilnius, are already hard working on that. Actually, we had a workshop last week in Madrid to bring it all together. So UPN invited us to come together, to be there in presence, to talk to each other, discuss and explain. And what is already fixed is that this ITCOS, Innovative Teaching Concept on Standardization, will be tried out in 5 pilots. Those pilots are already part of the proposal and of the grant agreement. It starts with a pilot on university bachelor's level, but there will also be 2 pilots on master's level who try to integrate what we found, the intended learning outcomes within the teaching concept in existing courses. We will have an extracurricular pilot at Milano, and we will have a summer school to try it out in a very compact format, 2 weeks online, 5 days in presence at Uni Graz. Then there will be a pilot of in-company training held by TU Eindhoven, and Fraunhofer dedicates their pilot to lifelong learning, the Year 2 pilot. So this is what we already planned while writing the proposal, and now working on this great project, we found maybe something is missing, maybe some more pilots would be interesting. You may know that EDU4Standards is dedicated to higher education. You may have perceived that within the presentations, sometimes preschool, kindergarten was mentioned, and also vocational education and training. So this is not higher education. What happened? Well, working out the intended learning outcomes on standardization in line with values and European interests, we found that it makes sense to go further, at least within that comprehensive framework. And so going beyond higher education, including school and also preschool, we would like to call for further pilots to try out if and how this also could work. Bear in mind, firstly, we were oriented towards the European qualification framework, directly addressing the labor market with some specific competencies. Then we found from a societal perspective, it would make sense to broaden the scope towards school and towards attitude. And this is exactly what was provided in June 24 by the Austrian government, asking for a standardization strategy that includes at least the vet sector and also the schools. So next slide, please, Maria. So what I want to add now is a few examples. It all stems from the Madrid workshop, and thus I'm very, very thankful to all who took part then, because those examples you now see and we are going to present, they do not stem from Unicrat's team, not from Christina and Barbara, the philosophers, not from Heike, the educational scientist, and also not from me, from the field of the law. These are examples that were provided by standardization teachers that are experienced and very, very established teachers for decades. Now, after having, so to say, summed up the intended learning outcomes, those teachers were a bit confused and thought, how can I teach values? I'm not master, I'm not a philosopher, how can I do that? And the first suggestion was, well, let's invite a guest lecturer to give a course, to give a lecture on philosophy and ethics. You see, this is number 0, because it was just a starting point. I'm pretty sure Christina, Barbara, Heike as well, they would be happy to come to you to tell you about the methodological and the theoretical framework of value-based education. But this is not the point. So please, next point, Maria. The next suggestion was, what about providing short video clips that stop at a specific point with a question mark, with a question that students have to think about? This, for example, was suggested by TU Delft. And now we come pretty much closer to that, what we want. Starting with a question, making students think about EU values and EU interests. This is what we should reach in education on standardization. Next point, please. So with this starting point, now many examples were provided by the participants of the workshop. I just took a few of them. For example, the norm person. Everyone knows, the norm person is male, 175 centimeters and 75 kilograms. But what about other male persons? What about female? What about kids? So if we start thinking that way, we broaden the scope. The standard norm person now grows towards others, and this means taking into account for example, impaired people as well, which is a matter for non-discrimination, inclusion. This takes into account the female, which is of course a gender issue, kids, and so on and so far. Broaden the way you think and talk about standards. So next point, please. This was suggested by Polimi, Milano. Let's have students write a standard. So there is the ETSI handbook, you know all very well how to write a standard. You add the facts and then let them write it. And afterwards you ask, do you think there could be something missing? Missing from the point of gender or green or other values like freedom, dignity. Again, you let students work on standardization, let them do the stuff as usual with some facts, but then add something. Add European values, add European interests. Ask for them. Students will, as we all think, what will happen, they will have answers. They will start thinking about it. Next point, next suggestion. Well, this was from University of Belgrade. Why not using shocking use case scenarios? So if there is a project, a standard to be written or negotiated, and you see pretty clear it tends towards, let's say, total surveillance. So then you should say no. Total surveillance. This is a matter of human dignity. And this is not where we, European people engaging in standardization, want to go. So it is about clear red lines. Was there another one? Yes, pretty pragmatically, TU Eindhoven. Let's take values and EU interests in standardization simply as a matter of fact, a matter of life, and then use it pretty strategic. So this can be a quality sign, for example, if we simply keep to European interests, to European values when talking about standardization. Is there another one, Maria? Yeah, and of course, Robert remembered, don't forget high-level indicators, how to measure that our education really meets the expectations, really takes into account the European values and the European interests as well. So those examples stem from the workshop in Madrid, as I mentioned. I guess it's just a couple of them. I guess it would be very, very easy to go on to find some more. For example, just as far as I remember, one said, but ISO is refining standards towards sustainability. Let's take an old standard and the refined one, and let's see how sustainability was integrated there. These are all teaching methods. Very easy. Just think of it, bring it into your teaching. Next slide, please. Yes, and this is, for me, put it in a nutshell, it is sort of a motto, a statement that stems from Nizar, from Polimi, who at some point said, well, that's it. Our teaching, if we take into account European values and European interests that we all know because we are European, if we make aware those interests and values. So this is boosting competitiveness of the European Union through standardization in line with European values and interests. And I guess this is such a nice statement. I wanted to put it here and share it with all of you because I think this is exactly the point. What value-based standardization, taking into account European interests in standardization, in teaching on standardization. is about. So I guess this was it also from my side. There is a thank you. There's some questions. Please give me another minute just to thank all the people that supported us. The work you heard now was done by the University of Graz team, but of course, as I mentioned, all the partners in research supported that work. They were willing to give us their time, spend time together, listen to us, bring in their ideas, discuss intensely how standardization can be enriched, can be brought towards European values and interests. There was also the EAG group, the broadening towards preschool even was initiated by members of the EAG group. We were allowed to present our findings, our status quo of the work, nearly every month to that group to ask for feedback. And let me also thank, of course, the Uni Graz Internal Advisory Board Group, Human Factor in Digital Transformation, who also spent time, discussed with us, helped us, brought us forward. And well, last but not least, let's thank all those who disseminate our work. First of all, Kirsten, and of course you, Maria. Thank you for organizing that workshop that gives us the opportunity, that enables to share our thoughts, findings, and now the first solutions with many other people. Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, and all the other speakers. Thank you for attending. I see we have already some questions in the Q&A box and in the chat. So we will move on to the Q&A phase of the webinar now. I will start, in order, by time of having received the question. Before asking the first question, I see also, Ivana, that you have a hand raised. So just to make sure if you want to speak, so ask your question by speaking, or if it was, just a mistake and you did not mean to raise your hand. While you let us know, let me read the first question that we have in the Q&A box. It's from Anonymous, so we don't know who asked this, but the question is, are there any competencies for standards professionals out of this work that you can share? So I don't know who wants to take it, even more than one. But please.
Maybe I can jump in. So under competences, we mean knowledge, skills, attitudes that Heike also mentioned. And in our framework, we also included responsibility and autonomy. And these are, as an examples, we had 3 slides where we presented excerpts of the 3 frameworks, which comprise the big EDU4Standards value-based ILOs framework. So we have basically for each of the levels defined the knowledge, skills, responsibility, and autonomy. Of course, due to time issues, we couldn't discuss all of this in detail, but our work will be, not sure, maybe Maria, you know more than this, will be published, I guess, on the website. The deliverable, is it already there?
No, we will put it after we arrive because there were, some rounds of modification.
Okay.
When the final version is confirmed, we will put it in our website and Zenodo channel. So I think it will be out pretty soon because it was actually finalized, I believe. On
yes.
the side.
Right, so this is the big document which contains what Barbara mentioned at the beginning, the glossary, support studies, so explaining a whole approach rationale, and also the frameworks and in detail where you can look at it.
Well, maybe I may add, this is of course the, so to say, first draft. The study is done, it's finished, but now we go into the pilots. And we have 1.5 years at least to try it out in those 5-6 very diverse pilots, from bachelor or master to in company training, lifelong learning, summer schools, and so on. And of course, this is for gaining new experience, new insights, to refine the intended learning outcome and also the overall teaching concept. This is what fundamental research is about.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I don't know if anyone else wants to add, if Barbara or Heike. Otherwise, we have other questions as well. So one question I see in the chat from Cyril is, have you already experienced where today's standardization lacks considering basic values?
If I may try to answer to Cyril. Hello, Cyril. Good to have you in, to see that you are still interested in our work. That's great. Well, as I mentioned, the ISO now is working on sustainability, refining standards with a specific goal, the sustainability. We have to know that the European Commission sees there is a lack simply due to the new strategy. So after having the evaluation report in 22, the Commission provided the new strategy, asking for values and EU interests being introduced into standards as well as standardization. And this is why we thought trying it via education would be a good way. So if we can motivate standardization teachers to actively integrate values and interests, this is a first step toward better educated standardization experts that then can engage in better standards. We reduce all the values, as Barbara said, to a couple of, let's say, 5. Enshrined in Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union, because there is no discussion about that. And we try to refer all the European interests into the priorities of the European Commission. This is definitely gender, green, and digital skills. But of course, from this starting point, 5 and 3, you can broaden, expand to very many specific issues, depending on what is going to be standardized. There was one suggestion in the workshop that also could imagine to take some existing standards and go through it with the lens of values and interests. See what is missing there. Let's have a look on it explicitly, taking into account those groups of values and interests. And then refine it, for example, together with your students. I hope I could give you an answer. Thanks, Cyril.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your answer. I hope, Cyril, you can confirm whether this addressed your question and your curiosity that you had. Let's go on another question that I find in the chat from Uttara Savant. Would the standardization training include conflict handling and fragmentation? Don't know if this was already part of your work.
Yes. Value conflicts are a matter of philosophy and ethics. Barbara, I'm pretty sure you can tell about how to handle value conflicts and conflicts of interests.
Well, as you say, Elizabeth, values, especially in the plural, can indicate that there are different values and then there can be a conflict. But when we talk about value conflicts, we also implicate that people have different values. And when there are conflicts, we can go on a basis of values and we can discuss which values are on fire in a way. And we can try to find a more general level. And that's where it's really good to have very abstract levels. For example, when we come to, I indicated that at the beginning, when we come to to different interests, I can make clear on a more abstract level that there are interests that are shared, and that can lead to finding a compromise. This is very abstract, I'm sorry, but I mean, there are very good schooling systems for handling value conflicts, but I think the general idea is that we have a hierarchy of values, and if we can agree that we agree on some abstract values, that is in a very fundamental way the prerequisite for us being able to find a solution together, which can be a compromise. And so, yes, definitely that will be in there, but I'm not a specialist for all the different kinds of value conflict education systems. But in general, I would say we need the idea of more abstract levels, or levels of abstraction that are higher than others, in order to find solutions that everybody can live with. And I really like this. I really like this question. I was actually thinking about it already when you typed it. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Barbara. We have one remaining question that we actually already addressed about the publication of the framework, which is part of the deliverable that all our speakers today have produced. I just want to highlight that beyond this deliverable, we will also remind you actually that we will publish the slides that were presented today, and also maybe some, shorter versions like small videos to better disseminate, because now, as Heike also said in the beginning, we need to validate and disseminate and have, people actually use the framework to collect the feedback. So that's what will be our focus. In the meantime, Hugo posted a question here in the chat. Let me read it for you. What do you think is the best way to map values to different learning outcomes, not only for the pilots, but also for future standardization courses? Do you have any ideas?
I can say a little bit about that. Now, with the framework at the moment, we proposed 4 different educational stages and on different levels of abstractions, things people they should know about values and things people need to work maybe also in different value systems and to navigate between different values and to negotiate different values. One of the other things which now in the next stage we have to do is we have to think about how can people experience these values. And this is now the big task for the next step, to create examples for courses where it's not just the learning about values, but the experiencing, the experiencing on different values. And this is what I meant when I said we also have to consider how then learning situations are always complex. They're not just about one thing. So if we think about education for different sectors or professionalization in different sectors, there's a variety of competencies we need to develop, such as, for example, the 21st century skills, which are reflecting on how in a more complex world, how do we better prepare people for the future, and how can we stress creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. Yeah, and I do believe that we best go forward if we find a map, if we find a way to map these value skills these value competences we've been talking about here into these other frameworks, to make them visible for different kind of educators in the standardization work and world, and how they are aligned to a lot of other sets, which they already know, not just on the knowledge dimension, but also on dimension of competencies, which also need to be experienced in a variety of professional learning opportunities.
Thank you, Heike. Okay, Hugo is also thanking for your answer. I don't see other questions in the chat
Sorry, Maria. I see one that asks for a certification.
Oh, you're right. I missed it. You're right.
So, if I may,
Sure.
of course, talking about the pilots, there will be some students highly educated in standardization, and we are also talking about is some sort of certificate. Well, actually, there is a initiative going on towards a pan-European certificate. As you may already know, the high-level forum on standardization is working on that. This is what I know and what I would like to spread also here. So there is some initiative ongoing. Let's hope there will be a very nice, maybe EDU4Standards standardization seal on certificating standardization in line with values and interests, European interests.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Sorry, Utara, for missing that question. I believe there are no others, right, in the chat and also in the Q&A box. We answered those in the box. We have also a comment from Knut about providing certificates to TU Berlin students when they pass a course on standardization. So this is an example. Thank you. If there are no other questions or comments or anything that you want to share, I think we can close the webinar 5 minutes early. It's even better for our schedule. Thank you all again for staying with us this hour, this afternoon, to listen and to debate about this first result, one of the first results of the project. And stay in touch with EDU4Standards channels and website for the recordings and all the material that was presented today, and to get involved even more in our project. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon. Bye bye.
Thanks to the audience. Thanks to all of you.